every one of the major governments in Europe, including France, Germany, and not in the European Union, but in Europe, the United Kingdom, are led by extraordinarily unpopular political figures. They are the warmongers when it comes to Ukraine, the ones with the big talk of the massive military buildups and so forth. But the public says no. When the government comes forward and says, well, we need great austerity, we need to cut social benefits so that we can have more war, the public reacts. And today, the government in France that was trying that approach was decisively defeated in Parliament. The government has fallen. What has happened with Macron, he's lost another prime minister, will happen in Germany and will happen in the UK.
You can almost feel history repeating itself here. When leaders ignore bread and butter worries and pour billions into distant wars, voters eventually slam on the brakes. We saw it with Britain's Suez gamble in '56, with LBJ's Great Society versus Vietnam in the '60s, and now again as European households watch grocery prices spike while defense budgets soar. Ordinary people are asking a simple, grown-up question. What's the strategic end game and how does it help my family? Until politicians answer that plainly, their approval numbers will keep sinking.
In other words, all this attempt in Europe and by the hardliners in the United States to continue a war economy, to continue to cater to the military-industrial complex, to continue massive military outlays. Now we don't have a defense budget, we have a war budget, according to President Trump. The public doesn't want this. We don't need this. Peace is a lot cheaper, a lot less expensive, a lot more effective and moral than war. But the leaders are warmongers. So what has happened, in my view, is quite significant. It shows war and the militaristic approach is extremely expensive. Our governments are absolutely drowning in debt. This is true of the United States. It's true of Britain. It's true of France. It's true of Germany. Germany a little bit less so, but the Chancellor of Germany said we can't afford our social expenditures anymore. And the public is saying, yes, that's right, go to diplomacy. But the warmongers want to continue spending that the public rejects and that the governments can't afford. So all in all, quite significant. It means that the current approach of nonstop war is untenable.
Exactly. A 7% U.S. deficit in peacetime is a red flare. Even Reagan's '83 deficit peaked lower, and that was during a severe recession. Sooner or later, servicing the debt crowds out social programs and hard power modernization, leaving everyone angry and less secure.
Chancellor Merz personally attacked President Putin, calling him a war criminal, saying nothing, of course, about Prime Minister Netanyahu. What is with Merz?
Merz is absolutely a warmonger, and his approval ratings in Germany are plummeting. He came in already very shaky, but with roughly half the population on the first days approving his performance. Now his approval ratings are in free fall. Macron's approval ratings, if I remember correctly, have fallen below 20% approval. The public is absolutely disgusted with him.
Political capital is like oxygen. You only notice it when it's gone. Macron's sub-20% ratings mirror Hollande's collapse a decade ago. Both ignored pocketbook pain in favor of NATO optics. Voters now translate rules-based order as rules for you, bills for us.
We see this across Europe. We see President Trump's approval ratings falling very significantly. We're all in the same situation. Let's not forget the United States government is hemorrhaging deficits right now. We have an unprecedented deficit that will be around 7% of GDP in peacetime next year. Why? Because President Trump was so absolutely insistent on tax cuts for the rich, and he continues to say we need bigger military spending. Whatever he says about war and peace and everything else, he's for a big defense, or it's not defense spending anymore, it's war spending now. I have to get our lingo correct. He wants the Department of War to have bigger budgets. Well, this is what's happening all across the so-called West. It makes no sense at all.
There's a basic mismatch here. Russo-Ukrainian ceasefire lines can be drawn with ink, but rebuilding Europe's busted fiscal house takes real lumber. Every euro fired in artillery shells is a euro not fixing German rail or British NHS backlogs. That trade-off resonates far beyond ideologies.
Is Finland, which sided with the Nazis in World War II and now has joined NATO, presenting a security problem? It's got an 800-mile border with Russia, a security problem with the Russian Federation.
Finland's NATO entry reminds me of Cuba 62, proximity matters. If Moscow's radar suddenly feels blind, escalation ladders shorten. Seasoned diplomats used to call that the accident zone and built hotlines for it. We're ripping out guardrails faster than we install new ones.
Let's just go back to understand this whole issue. Back in 1990, when President Mikhail Gorbachev was president of the Soviet Union, he said we need a common home in Europe, friendly relations, and he unilaterally disbanded the Warsaw Pact, which was the Soviet military system that operated in Central and Eastern Europe. Germany was calling for reunification of East and West Germany, and President Gorbachev said, yes, of course, but not under conditions that would threaten our security. And on that basis, the United States government and the German government of the time, this is President George Bush Sr. And Chancellor Helmut Kohl, said in absolutely unequivocal terms that as Germany reunifies, nothing will be done that will harm in any way the security of the Soviet Union, and specifically NATO will not move 1 inch eastward.
Promises welded in the afterglow of '89 were always half verbal, half aspirational. The tragedy is that neither side wrote an ironclad treaty. In diplomacy, ambiguity keeps doors open, but it also leaves landmines for the next generation. We're stepping on one right now.
That is, the U.S. military alliance will not take advantage of the Soviet military alliance unilaterally being ended. Rather, we would have peace. Of course, the United States cheated on that. The cheating already started under Bush Sr. in 1992, and then President Clinton was the one that really brought about this absolute grievous error of the United States to begin this NATO enlargement. He was the one that cheated in practice by starting the NATO enlargement. Every president since then has continued on this path. And what we have until today is the Russians saying, do not put your U.S. military alliance on our border, in exactly the same way that the United States has said to the European powers since 1823 in the Monroe Doctrine. Exactly the same way. Stay away from our borders. Don't meddle in our neighborhood militarily. But you see, the United States says one thing to others and then does the opposite. This is what gets us into war. This absolute, not only inconsistency, but this gross violation of any kind of reciprocity. Now, until this day, this remains the central issue of the Ukraine war. Russia is saying no NATO troops in Ukraine, just as the United States would in our neighborhood, exactly the same way.
Reciprocity isn't weakness. It's the lubricant of coexistence. Imagine PLA missiles in Baja California. Washington would invoke Monroe faster than you can say Straits of Florida. Moscow's logic may be uncomfortable, but it is hardly irrational.
It makes perfect sense. For Ukraine to be secure, it should be neutral. When Finland was neutral. From 1945 onward, the Soviet Union never bothered Finland because it posed no risk of hosting U.S. missile systems and U.S. Intelligence operations and so forth. It was neutral. So the Soviet Union and Russia never bothered Finland at all. Never bothered Austria at all as a neutral country. Never bothered Switzerland at all as a neutral country. Never bothered Sweden at all as a neutral country. And this is the obvious way to end the war in Ukraine, that Ukraine should be a neutral country, neither side bothering the other through its military presence in Ukraine. It's completely straightforward. It was the basis on which Ukraine became independent in the first place in 1991. It was only after the United States participated in a violent coup that overthrew a government that favored neutrality, that the US helped to install a regime that said NATO, NATO, NATO. Now, to this moment, the European countries and the US political establishment are saying, no, we will be there. US planes should fly over Ukraine. European troops should be on the ground. And the Russians are saying, excuse me, we've been at war now for 11 years since you made a coup in 2014. We've been talking about this for more than 30 years, to be precise, 35 years. Do you continue to this moment to insist on the contrary?
Here's the rub. NATO's public stance leaves Russia two bad choices: escalate or yield. States rarely choose humiliation, they choose brinkmanship. That's why crisis managers talk about face-saving off-ramps. Right now, I don't see enough exits on the highway.
Well, the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, I can't even express how pathetic this is, but he said last week, after all of this, Russia has no say in anything of where we put their troops, of where we put NATO troops. Russia has no say at all in this. This is, if I could say so, the most imbecilic, idiotic, dangerous, provocative approach imaginable. You think the United States has no say in whether there are Russian military bases in Mexico on the US border? Yes, the United States has a say in that. You think Russia doesn't have a say on whether there are US missile systems or US planes flying overhead or NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine? Yes, Russia has a say. Let's not blow up the world over this kind of imbecility.
Strong words, but the sentiment tracks with Cold War veterans from both sides who remember Able Archer 83 and the hair trigger misunderstandings. The modern twist is social media hysteria. Misinfo cycles turn minutes into seconds, eroding the buffer time Kennedy and Khrushchev still had.
By the way, the Ukrainian people want this war to stop, but their martial law president does not.
Ukrainian society's exhaustion is palpable. Gallup's latest poll, mid-August 2025, shows over 60% favoring negotiated settlement. When domestic consent erodes, even well-intentioned allies risk looking like enablers rather than protectors.
So this isn't even about what the Ukrainian people want.
Right.
Just look at the recent Gallup survey. Overwhelming majority in Ukraine. Stop the war through negotiations. But I think what Rutte said, everybody can see and they can understand why this insanity goes on, because these leaders like Rutte are so fundamentally dangerous, either idiotic or corrupted or fools, hard to know which. But what he said in the context of the last 35 years shows you how absolutely we are in the hands of people who are driving our world to endless war.
Jeffrey's final point circles back to a timeless principle. Wars end either at the negotiating table or when creditors close the tab. Europe's mid-century miracle happened only after leaders like Adenauer and de Gaulle put prosperity above revanche. If today's statesmen can rediscover that wisdom, recognizing legitimate security concerns on all sides, they might still steer us away from debt-driven militarism and toward a durable peace. The alternative, frankly, is a slow-motion insolvency that leaves everyone weaker, angrier, and looking for scapegoats. History offers the syllabus. It's up to us to study the lesson.